Does your vision for business match what you see happening on a daily basis? Welcome to Jim White's Circle of Success show, where Jim White brings it all together. For over 30 years, Jim White has worked with organizations and individuals worldwide to help develop and implement excellence. You'll get the inside story on how to create innovative leaders from one corner of your company to the other. Get everyone on your team contributing to the bottom line. Keep building revenue, even when the economy and your customers have flatlined, and more. Jim White's Circle of Success show covers it all, from communication to contract negotiation, from personal fulfillment to revving up cash flow. It's not about theories, it's about showing what works and how to make it work for you. And now, here's your host, Jim White.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. We have two of the world's foremost experts in complexity theory with us today. They are Dr. Ted Lewis and Dr. Rodrigo Nieto Gomez. They're going to be with us to talk about business complexity. You're going to hear terms like black swan. You're going to hear all types of things today. The mission of the show today is to give you deeper understanding of this complex theory and how it can add value to your top line, your revenue, and your earnings and your brand. So we'll be right back with Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gomez after this message.
This segment is brought to you by 12 O'Clock High Leadership and Management Summit. 12 O'Clock High is one of the undisputed best movie classics of all time. It is also one of the best business learning tools available. The movie rated #1 by top executives for its influence on their management styles. Now, the inspiration of the 12 O'Clock High Leadership and Management Summit, an innovative one-day event and 30-day follow-up where you will quickly see what's working and not working on the front lines of your company and in your own leadership style. Learn more at 12high.com. That's 12high.com.
Thank you and welcome back. As I said at the opening, we're going to, my favorite word, drill down on this subject of business complexity. And we're going to look behind the doors, if you will, of what it means and what it doesn't mean. And as I said, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gomez are the foremost experts in this field. So, welcome to the show, Ted.
Thank you, Jim.
Welcome to the show to you.
Jim, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. I should say welcome back to you, sir, and welcome for the first time.
That's it.
I am so excited, guys. I tell you what, we've been talking about business complexity. And so why don't we start off with you, Ted? What are we talking about? What is the complexity theory? And then Rodrigo, you can jump in. So it's to set the stage for our audience as to what we're talking about here in business complexity. Ted?
Thanks, Jim. Let me give you some examples of complexity theory. Everybody's familiar with the lotto system, right? You buy a ticket and you get to win, the potential to win millions of dollars. But it turns out studies have been made of the winners of lottery systems, and it turns out 1/3 of the winners are poorer after they win the lottery than they were before. 44% actually lose all the money in the first 5 years. So here we have a simple system where you buy a ticket and you win lots of money, but it has a complex result in some cases. So if you can think of it in terms of complexity theory, here you have a situation where when you win lots of money, it makes you poorer. Another example of this, Jim, would be currently what's going on with the housing market. You had government policies that made it easier to own a home, lower interest rates, fewer requirements for getting a loan, etc. And in 2006, lots of people owned their own home. In 2008, we had a housing market crash. So why is that? Why is it that making it easier and more affordable to own a home ends up producing an economy where fewer people actually own their home. So these are pretty dramatic examples of complexity theory in operation. So complexity is different than something that's complicated. Something that's complicated means that we probably don't understand it. A complex system may also be complicated, or it could be very simple. And in these examples I gave you, we have a simple system with complex behaviors. So complexity theory deals more with the consequences of a system, less with its actual construction.
Rodrigo, your take on complexity.
Well, as Ted mentions, many of the things that have to do with complexity are relevant. Many of the phenomena are relevant because it's not so much about the parts that we have, but the interactions that the parts have among themselves. Let me give you an example, Jim. Think about the human body and what life represents. We are a living being. We are a living being because many parts interact with each other in order for us to be alive. And a physician will have to go and learn about the body by separating those parts, so studying the heart, studying the stomach, studying all the systems that form a human being. But by doing that, when we did it, we had to take apart that system. So the thing that made it alive was not alive anymore. So complexity is what happens when many parts interact with each other and we get something that is more than the sum of its parts.
What I want to do, and I think that's a great way to set the foundation for the show today, Ted and Rodrigo. We are doing a summit, and I'm proud to say that you two are involved in that in September. And we announced this on last week's show. It's a JLW CEO Summit that we're doing in San Jose at the Hayes Mansion, September 25th and 26th. And the reason we're doing that is to take complexity and all these different tools that a normal CEO or a business leader, they haven't a clue what they mean. And our objective is to be able to give them tools that they can leave at 6 o'clock on the 26th of September, go back to the workplace with a different strategy and a deeper understanding how they can use the tools from complexity. Now, just by the word itself, and in the next 45 minutes or so, which is a long time on live television. Normally you get three minutes, which I just absolutely drives me nuts. But in the next 45 minutes, that's not enough time because the three of us are set for hours and hours and hours just on words alone, right? So making sure that our audience understands this and what we're going to do in the next 45 minutes or so. But for our CEOs and our business leaders that are watching the show today, they're thinking right now, how in the world am I going to make money as a result of this? Now, that's just who we are. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and that's just where we are. Now, you guys from the academia world, and that's one of the great opportunities we have, is take all the brain trust and all the experience that you do on a daily basis and bridge it to the private sector. That's a great opportunity that we have. Now, as I say that, you two are a little different from the academic, and both of you are professors at the Naval Postgraduate School, right? But you both have entrepreneurial backgrounds, right?
Yes.
You both have run businesses. So that's what's so fascinating by being able to drill down on this topic, and our CEOs and our business leaders that are watching, they're going to pay attention. Why? Because they want to hear from people that's got the latest cutting edge information, what it means, and especially when it's come from people that's actually had responsibility from a bottom line. So that makes a difference, and that's what we're bringing to the table in September for our other faculty, and we'll be drilling down on that more as we get to the show. What I'd like to do now is throw up a PowerPoint slide, Ted and Rodrigo. And it is a slide from 10 stages corporate life cycle. Now, I started using this concept I'm going to date myself here, some 35 years ago. And I was looking for a way to be able to identify the companies that I was buying in my turnaround work and acquisition work. And I wanted to link it to like humans. We humans, we have a DNA and we have a life cycle, right? We're going to born. We're going to born. That's get my. I know I get a lot of grammars. That's Georgia talk, Ted. You got to get it right, okay? Georgia talk. Okay. So get my grammar, and I tell you what, I got some loyal listeners that every time I do that. Right now, I got a tweet coming in telling me, you know, Jim, get it together, right? So I'm okay. We're here. So as we go back and look at this slide, a corporation, like an individual, has a life cycle. So as we look at it, and we're going to follow the monitor here, our audience can see this. The first stage, which we call the courtship, and that's kind of initial idea, you're born, right? And then where like the infancy, that's step number 2 in the corporate world. Then at number 3, that what we call go, and that's kind of about 17 or 18 in the real world. That's our teenagers, right? We're nothing is in our way. Then we got the adolescence, and that kind of falls in the same category. And then we come up to prime. That's when businesses, everything's just clicking, right? Everything is in place. And then you got that stability phase. That's where you want to stay. You want to try to stay between that stability stage. Now, I tell all of my clients that it's just like taking care of your health. You got to go to the doctor to get checkups, right? If you don't, you're going to have a surprise. And the surprise would be what? In the term that we're going to talk about here coming up. Would that be a black swan?
It could be a black swan if it's severe consequences.
Right. And if I do not, if I do not keep my corporation between the lines of healthy, that I got proper revenue, I'm doing the earnings, I got the market share, I'm innovating, and I'm doing all those things, it could have severe consequences, right? And we're going to talk about in the next segment some of these companies. We can give from examples, right, Ted, that are results of complexity, are results of the black swans, and results of what you call the innovator's dilemma, right? And some of the results of the paradox of enrichment. All of these words, our CEOs are saying, my God, what are they talking about? They're talking, but this is real strategy, right? If you understand how to use it, right? Mm-hmm. So we set the stage. So we got to get another break in. We come back after break. We'll pick up and we'll start drilling down on this and start talking about how complexity and using some of these real examples from the lifestyle of a corporation and the ones that are falling off on the side of the horseshoe that's on the way to death, and some of these organizations that are almost at death's door right now, and can we reverse that cycle by using some of these concepts, okay? So hang in, we got to get another break. Right after this message, we'll be back. We'll be right back with Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gomez.
This segment is brought to you by Circle of Success, a dynamic, year-long intensive management and leadership development process designed to help individuals and organizations reach their goals quickly. A customized process addressing specific needs and identifying the critical opportunities particular to the individual and organization, with results measured in increased revenue, increased net profits, and increased equity. The Circle of Success, inspiring excellence in people. At jlwhiteinternational.com/circles.
Okay, we're back with Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gomez. Prior to the break, we were given examples of complexity And I threw up a slide that you can look at for is the 10 stages of a corporate life cycle, and how complexity plays a big part of that. But our CEOs and our business leaders really don't know that complexity is at play there. Is that fair enough? So Rodrigo, is continue to drill down on that when we in the contents of corporate world, and we're going to try to stay in that prime and that really. We got it going on stage, if you will. My 19-year-old would say. So, what do you think? What can we add to in the contents of the 10 stages of the life cycle for its complexity?
So I think it's a very good metaphor, especially if we think about that we're talking about the life of a company. Right. That life, as the human body, is composed by many systems that interact with each other and with the environment. So the same way that the life of a human ends when the systems that we have in place, our body, decays to a point where entropy kills us, where the life of our system is not there anymore, a company can go through all of those stages, and at the end, energy won't be there anymore. So the differences between a human being and a company is that now we have the tools to reverse the entropy that kills systems in companies. We still don't have those tools with people. Hopefully we'll have them one day, but until we have a radical extension of life, we can accomplish that at the organizational level. We can give a radical extension of life to a company if we know how to reverse that process that you mentioned before, Jim.
So Jim, the idea of complexity theory, I mean, the title sounds scary, right? It sounds like, well, if it's about complexity theory, it should be complicated or complex to understand, and that's not it at all. Actually, what Rodrigo is saying is that we have a history of about 350 years of using the scientific method to break problems down into parts and explain the parts, and therefore explain the whole system. And complexity theory is just a different way at looking at systems where you can't break them down into parts, or it doesn't make sense to break it into parts because you lose the holistic effect of the system. And so complexity theory is just a fancy way of saying, let's look at the whole system, and are there techniques that we can have that are unlike traditional scientific techniques, but they are a set of techniques that we can use to look at the fitness of a company, or look at the history of a company, or determine what the future profitability of a company is, through using a different tool set, the so-called complexity theory tool set, instead of the traditional economic tool sets, which in many cases don't work anymore.
How about, and I'm going to do a radical left turn here, okay, which is surprise, surprise, right? What's going on in Europe in the economic? What's going on in the United States? And at the opening, you were talking about the housing market. So how is our audience to understand that as it relates to the complexity theory? Is that complicated, or is that complexity?
No, I think people generally agree that economics is a complex system, because, particularly nowadays, because it's a global system, it's no longer confined just to one country. But it's an interesting experiment. What the Bernanke is saying effectively is we can make Americans richer by devaluing the dollar. So think about that for a second. By reducing how much the dollar's worth, we can make people richer. That's a very clever example of a complex system, or he could be wrong. We don't know at this stage. He could be right. He could be wrong. Yeah, if he's right, he'll be deemed a genius, and if he is right, it's probably because of the complex interaction amongst the flows of money throughout the world that are driving that kind of counterintuitive phenomenon.
Your thoughts, Rodrigo?
Jim, Ted just mentioned a crucial word in the complexity systems environment, which is counterintuitive. Every time one of your CEOs listening to our program today has heard the word counterintuitive, somebody came and said, well, in fact, it's a counterintuitive result. They are describing a complex system where second and third degree consequences surprise us all the time. Things happen that we cannot intuitively think about because the interaction of the parts is not evident. Your public will know the so-called butterfly effect. A butterfly, there was a very good movie. The second part was not that good, but a very good movie, the first one, where if a butterfly flies in Beijing, we get a hurricane in New York City. That's the saying. What this means is that the system is so complex that a small event somewhere in the world triggers a series of cascade events that end up with a hurricane in New York City. So that's a metaphor, that's an example, but we see it in the business environment all the time where unpredictable events will transform the environment in counterintuitive ways, and companies that were at the top of their game are now extinct. Those counterintuitive events, those things that a CEO, a great CEO who happened to be doing his job, managing the company responsibly, and suddenly something changes, a butterfly flies in Beijing, and that company goes bankrupt. Well, science offers today's complexity theory offers today ways of thinking about those counterintuitive things and hedging part of that risk if we understand complex adaptive systems.
So
go ahead, Ted.
Classic example of that going on right now. I would RIM, the company that made Blackberries, probably would have never imagined that the fact that Apple was making iPods at the same time they were making Blackberries would destroy their business.
Yeah.
And what happened is the BlackBerry went away because the iPod became the iPhone, became essentially the butterfly that destroyed RIM's business.
So, message to our CEOs and our business owners with that would be what? What must they be looking at on a daily basis? This is not sometime. This is an everyday, what I call scanning the hard drive each and every day.
Right.
What am I doing? What am I not doing? And so what did they take?
Well, in the case of RIM, they were victims of the innovator's dilemma, which is not our invention, but that's a well-known phenomenon. What's more interesting about the innovator's dilemma, which is essentially says that inferior, lower-priced, lower-capable products can improve so rapidly that they can wipe out your dominant product. But what's interesting about complexity theory is that we can come up with ways of managing the innovator's dilemma. So if you're the recipient, if you're the RIM and you're the recipient of this disruption, there are strategies that we'll talk about at this conference that can help you get back into the game. Basically, it can counter the innovator's dilemma.
Rodrigo, you'd mentioned about companies that, well, I'm going to pick up. I'm going to hold that thought up. I want to go to 1955. That's when Fortune first introduced the Fortune 500 list, right? 1955, right? So as we fast forward over 1955 to 2011, there's not a whole bunch of those companies that were originally on the 1955 list that are still there, right? Now, that's a result of a whole bunch of stuff, but is it not part of the complexity theory?
Yes, of course. There is an adaptation process that happens in the marketplace, and those who know how to adapt will navigate the waters of complexity with a better success than those who don't know how to adapt. And look that I said adapt. It doesn't matter how you're performing in your current business at that moment. You might be the best at doing what you're doing right now, but if you don't know how to prevent the challenges of the complex adaptive environments that surround your business, you'll go extinct. Think about the dinosaurs. It's a good example of extinction. The dinosaurs were around, they were the king of the planet. And then a complex event happened. A black swan, a meteorite that fell in the coast of Yucatan, changed the ecosystem where they behaved. And suddenly they went extinct. companies might have, like in the case of RIM, a asteroid looking at them from space, and if they don't know how to deal with that challenge, they can go the way of the dinosaur. So we have to learn how to be adaptive, and this is a key element.
This is a great time to get another break in. You see how fast it goes in live television? I mean, we're just absolutely just flies, okay? So, we'll be right back after this break. We're back with Dr. Lewis and Dr. Gomez. Rodrigo, pick up with you, please, sir. 1955, General Electric, little company General Electric, was on the 1955 list at number 5, I believe it was. Let me check. Number 4. They're number 4 in 1955. 2011, they're number 6. Right? So, that's a long time. So that's strategies that's evolved since 1955 to this time for General Electric is a perfect example of understanding these terms, right? Is that a safe assumption? Complexity, innovation, understanding black swans. They may not call it that, or the paradox of enrichment, innovator's dilemma. First, Rodrigo, explain to our audience what is a black swan, please.
So Taleb, the author of the book called The Black Swan, came with this very good brand for a phenomenon that has been studied before. So academia used to call it low probability, high consequence event. Low probability, high consequence. He got a better branding and he called it Black Swan. But basically what he's saying is that there are events that come out of the system where you perform that you cannot expect and suddenly transform completely how the ecosystem where you live interacts or exists. So think about the asteroid that I mentioned before destroying the ecosystem of the dinosaurs. For companies, think about touchscreens that are so good, so multi-touch touchscreens like the ones the Apple is using in order to build the iPhone, that destroy the competitive advantage of RIM, which was the keyboard. RIM thought that the BlackBerry would be able to compete always because they had basically the best keyboard and the best cell phone to see emails. They still do. I mean, their keyboards are incredible. Nevertheless, the market decided that something that they regarded as a highly important feature a few years ago was a non-important feature now because something else came and replaced it. That something else was for the cell phone market, the Black Swan. You can see Palmer, when the CEO of Microsoft, when he's shown the first iPhone, he laughs at it. He says, but that's the dumbest idea. Well, I'm guessing that Microsoft is not laughing anymore. If we see Windows 8, their mobile platform, it takes many of the cues of the iPhone a few years ago. So in this case, a Black Swan event was making a great mobile interface that disrupted completely the environment of the mobile business environment.
Ted, in the break, we talked about Kodak. So where does Kodak fit in? And we're going to come back and we're going to continue to drill down on these terms, but you have some experience with Kodak. So what happened to Kodak as it relates to a Black Swan?
Yeah, so the Kodak, as you saw in the break, was actually the inventor of the digital camera. And so one would expect that it would have dominated the digital era of photography, right? But that did not happen. And so it's now a poster child for the innovator's dilemma. That is, when you're faced by either a potential black swan or such a radical shift in your market or technology that essentially renders your products irrelevant, then you're a victim of the innovator's dilemma. So what we mean by the innovator's dilemma is here you had Kodak was the innovator. They invented the digital camera, but they had a dilemma. There was no way that their management could see replacing the revenues of film with the revenues of a nascent, emerging digital market for one thing, film is selling atoms, and photography nowadays is selling bits. That is, people don't get a hard copy of their photos so much as they transmit them via cell phones and the internet to web sharing sites, and so they were disrupted by that. And the dilemma for them was that they had no way of replacing their multi-billion-dollar revenues with a lesser revenue and staying alive.
You know, I found that just fascinating. Now, this is where I've got to throw out, and from our practice, leadership, I'm going to use terms. Leadership, I'm going to use terms culture, values, and I got another term that I've used for years, and people over here said, Jim, how were you able to go to Nigeria, identify this company in Nigeria in the worst economic conditions, and be able to acquire it, and to be able to turn it around and make money out of it? Well, my reply was, my job is to make the invisible visible. People go, my God, what's that mean? I'm glad you asked, so we'll drill on that a little bit more. So, the case of Kodak, where's leadership fall into that? Where's the culture? How do we bridge that between, is that a black swan? My question is, is that a black swan because leadership didn't see? Or how do we can't take the DNA of the human beings and running these companies, and that's what we're here to do, and is what we're really going to be drilling down in September is for our CEOs, it's going to be an audience, is giving them the tools and the strategies to be able to understand how we can use all of that. How can they use their leadership and use new predictive tools and everything to be able to say, oh, end of 10 life cycles, this is where I am. Watch out, you're about to fall off the cliff. If you don't, you got to reverse it. So I know I said a lot.
Yeah, so you're right. It comes down to culture, and the bottom line, the culture of that company, Kodak at that time, which I was associated with them 10 years ago, it didn't allow for them to think very far out of the box. There was a very efficient, process-oriented business, and there was no process diagram for innovation. So culture determines what you can think in a company.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to talk about at this CEO Summit is a cure for that. One of the cures is the Borg. As you know from the TV series Star Trek, the Borg absorbs and it extends. So if you're faced with a disruption like digital photography or a black swan, as Rodrigo has pointed out, what's your response to that? And one of the responses, not the only one, but one of them is the Borg. You absorb and extend. And I think when Windows 8 comes out in September timeframe, you'll see that it's Microsoft's attempt to absorb the Apple system features and extend it to a new level so that it can gain its customers back. And that's one viable strategy.
I love that. I couldn't help but think from the Borg, one of the little clips there. Resistance is futile. You know, we're going to absorb your technology and your behavior, right? Is that the term, Rodrigo?
I think it's an excellent comment to make. So I guess that the hive mind has spoken, and we cannot go more geeky than this.
We're doing well here.
Yeah. But I think it's a fair point. So here's the deal: we all heard the sentence or the phrase, the genie is out of the bottle.
Right.
But we always try to put the genie back if we are in a dominant position. So think about what happened to the recording industry in the 1990s, how strongly they fought against the MP3 format and the players.
Right.
They fought it with everything instead of embracing it. And what happened? Well, an outlier, someone from the outside, a computer-making company, came and became the best, the dominant actor today for distribution of music. We all have iTunes. We have all the downloaded music from Apple. Apple was not a music company. They were they were a computing company, but they saw the opportunity. So while a certain series of companies that were dominant in the market were trying to defend their, in this case, Apple extended and now dominates the market. So fighting innovation is almost always a losing battle. It can be in non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. More countries have nuclear weapons today than before. Or it can be in the business environment where you're trying to fight a technology. Think of the judo move that we saw Amazon perform in the last 3 years compared to the publishing industry. While the publishing industry was fighting the ebook reader format and saying that it was worthless, people would never want to read on their computer, and Amazon was preparing a master attack to send a black swan to that industry with the ebook reader, the Kindle. That product that made reading on a mobile device as comfortable as reading on a sheet of paper, and suddenly transformed the environment. So Amazon, which by the way their main business was selling books, so they were in danger of becoming irrelevant with the ebook format if somebody else did it, saw it before and decided to launch the bomb in the middle of the room. And today the Kindle format is the best-selling product Amazon has. So companies who keep fighting the genie and want to bring it down the inside of the bottle again are not being complexity driven. They are trying to defend a dying model.
Mm-hmm. So you have this investment in Microsoft, by Microsoft in Barnes & Noble this morning, which is classic board strategy. Mm-hmm. So Microsoft essentially missed the Amazon Kindle ebook market. So what's it going to do? It's going to take control of the ebook, the Barnes & Noble's ebook, mm-hmm. and it's going to try to absorb that, mm-hmm. absorb all the features of the Kindle, but extend it to some new realm. Now, we don't know what the extension is going to be, so there's still some surprises out there, perhaps. But that's their whole strategy, and so you can see this in play.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. We've got to get another break in. We'll be right back after this message.
So you can see this in play.
Fascinating.
The current business climate is becoming more and more complex. CEOs on the cutting edge know they must explore strategies to understand and command the marketplace. The first annual JLW CEO Summit, Strategies for a Complex Business World, will enable CEOs and business leaders to explore strategies applicable to an ever-increasing complex environment. A unique opportunity to become educated in complexity theories and inspired to turn those theories into real business strategies with a focus on earnings, market share, and brand improvement. A powerful format that is a blend of the World Economic Forum, the Clinton Initiative, and TED Talk. Hosted by best-selling author and world-recognized management consultant Jim White, Ph.D. Along with many specialized business authorities, you will explore strategies for a complex world. The much-anticipated JLW CEO Summit, Strategies for a Complex Business World, will be held in the beautiful Hayes Mansion in San Jose, California, September 25th and 26th. Visit us online at jlwceosummit.com.
Okay, we're back. While we're at break, we were chatting, talking about complexity in current events, and let's just pick up on that. Just pick one. So what's going on today, this morning?
So the classic example in my mind is what's going on right now with, as I mentioned before, housing. Right. So that's an example of what complexity theorists call the paradox of enrichment. It's a paradox because you would think that if you enrich something, it would get better. But actually what happens in many cases is it gets worse. So a good example of that now in high tech is the entire PC industry. It's reached a level of enrichment where, in some sense, the building more personal computers and flooding the market with, let's say, ever cheaper and cheaper Dells or HPs or Sony laptops is not going to be profitable because it's going to end up crashing that market. And this is why people talk now about the post-PC era. The smart money is on companies like Apple because they're building these post-PC devices, and I think calling them a post-PC device is on purpose because you want to distance yourself from the previous industry, which is essentially a dying industry. And what's interesting about this also is that the cell phone industry would go through the same kind of cycle. It's on the upside now because there's still a market out there of several billion cell phones per year. So that's still a long ways to go, maybe another 10 years. But ultimately, even Apple will suffer from the paradox of enrichment unless they do something else. And so this is why we're going to talk about another strategy in the CEO Summit, which is the multi-generational product company. So the idea behind a multi-generational product is to defeat this paradox of enrichment, because what you do is you just keep keying off the previous generation, but for a new, radically different generation, and that keeps the revenues flowing and keeps your enemies actually off balance.
I'm going to pull up another slide, and I want you to comment on that in that same thing, and Rodrigo, I want you to jump in too. So let's pull up this slide, please, Dave. Okay. So once again, we have the 10 stages of a corporate life cycle. And on those stages, I mean, this is, you put this together, Ted. So if we take, let's go on the right-hand side there, because we're talking about Microsoft. As we see Microsoft right now, based on some other things that we'll be introducing, the Z-score and other things like that, we see Microsoft falling under number 7 there. We got HP on the direction to death if they don't reverse it. Okay, so maybe it's use HP for this example, and
yeah. So on the right hand side, you see companies that are, well, they're past their prime, right? Because prime is stage number 5, and so Microsoft is faced with their own aristocracy. That is, they're sort of the king of the PC. They have built up a brand name which is phenomenal. They have they spend like what, 5 to 8 billion a year on R&D, but the problem is Microsoft is relatively irrelevant in the post-PC area. There's not a lot of people talking about the Microsoft tablet or the Microsoft iPhone, right? So their problem is pretty clear. HP is a victim of the paradox of enrichment because the PC world is going away, and HP was the dominant PC vendor. They had something like 17% market share, which is by far higher than Apple's share of PC. So you know, why is HP in trouble? Well, because of enrichment. Yahoo, as you well know from the news, it can't decide what it's going to be, right? Because it's got this bureaucracy.
Exactly.
So in a complexity theory world, Yahoo has to trim away a lot of the dependencies. You know, they have to figure out what to do with their Chinese Alibaba affiliate, and they have to figure out what to do about their management, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously Kodak, for all practical purposes, is gone, and they filed bankruptcy, and if they recover from bankruptcy, they'll be maybe 1/10 or 1/20th or 1/100th of their former size at best.
Rodrigo, at the CEO Summit, you are going to be addressing a topic that I found, well, several topics, but one I found fascinating. And I'm probably not going to do it justice by the time we have remaining in the show. But I'm talking about the dark side, or the dark X, the X prize. Let's take a minute and talk about what that is in relation to complexity.
So we like to think of innovation as a positive force to transform the world for the better. And thankfully that's the case most of the time, or at least very frequently. But innovation is a tool. It's something we humans have, and as many other tools, the ethics come from the people, from the hand handling the tool, not from the tool itself. A hammer is a beautiful tool, and we can build houses for the homeless, or it can be used to kill somebody with it. So it depends on who's handling it. Innovation has a dark side. It has a very dark side in which the forces of innovation are used in very dramatic ways to counter the efforts of law enforcement agencies or government, and bring pain or suffering to many groups of individuals. So the example I'd like to use, and this is how I like to study the dark side of innovation, is the drug cartels. Because the drug cartels are maybe the most dynamic, innovative, highly profitable industry in the history of mankind. They are in a Darwinian innovation mode where they literally live or die depending on the success of their business, and they are confronted by an adversary, the government or the governments, that are powerful, well-funded, and they have just one objective in mind, which is to destroy them. How do they survive? How is it possible that they are able to maintain the level of profitability that they have maintained for the last 20 to 30 years? CEOs, that is, drug lords, come and go, kingpins disappear, wholesales, a sale of the cartels are put in prison at the same time, and nevertheless, there is an enormous resilience where the companies, the cartels, keep being profitable. No other company in the real world can have this degree of profitability, and the question is why, and how can we learn to be as resilient as a drug cartel?
I find that fascinating, just fascinating. But it's innovation, and I remember the first time the three of us talking about this, just recently, I was thinking, when we share that with our audience, they're going to think, geez, you guys going into drug business? I'm going to set that clear. We're not. We're not.
Okay, yeah.
We're not. However, I view business from a CEO, you've got to have that mindset every day, innovation. And every morning you get up, you walk out your front door, you go to the workplace. Unfortunately, 80% of the people at the workplace, they don't want to be there to begin with. They're just there because they've got to figure out some way to make the mortgage payment, right? But just think if we can change that a little bit for them to say, wow, I can't wait to jump out the front door. I'm going to go be innovative today. And I have an opportunity, and I'm working in an environment, as you mentioned, Ted, Kodak, one of their problems, the culture, didn't give their people an opportunity to be innovative because I think you said didn't have a process to innovation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have a plan to innovate, right? So as we start tying all these pieces together, and what we want our audience to understand is these tools, once you understand them, once you understand how to apply them, and what we're going to be teaching in September is giving you those tools that we want you to stay in this number 5 or number 6 area, right? And that is prime and stable. That's what we want to do, and that's the reason we're on the show today talking about these concepts, is we want you to be there. Now, for example, I go back in Johnson & Johnson is another company, 1873, I believe it is. And they've had 45 consistent years of increasing in dividends. Why? Just like when you, in your slide, Kodak, why? Those are the questions that we're posing. Why? Why do some people live and others don't? So,
yeah, so the Dark X Prize is a really good way to illustrate how the innovator can exploit complexity. And in this case, the innovator maybe is the dark side, but it still illustrates the point of how you might use complexity theory to your own advantage. And the companies you mentioned, whether they're GE or Johnson & Johnson, don't sell the same thing today they did 100 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever. For Eastman Kodak, they only ever sold film.
right.
I mean, they had a nice run, right? They had 1883 to 2011 is not bad, but they fundamentally sold the same thing every year for over 100 years. So that's probably not a prescription for, exploiting complexity.
One that comes to mind is what is it? Ames, was it Ames department store that was basically a competitor to the Walmart in the early days? And they were selling the same thing. And that's what I thought about them, because they were doing the same thing. They were selling the same thing, and they were doing, and then eventually Ames just went away, and Walmart, as we all know, I mean, they're sitting on top of #1 position today. That's subject to their little issues that they may have.
But even in that case, it's interesting. So what's happening to Walmart right now, it's because, so two things. In the first case is that we see two complex systems collide. In this case, the business environment of Walmart in the United States with the business environment in Mexico. And reconciling those two business environments, for example, the Forging Corrupt Act of the United States with the corruption that exists, that is still commonplace and common currency in Mexico, would have required a more complex adaptive behavior from the part of the CEOs of Walmart. But there's another thing, and this is the biggest threat. So today Walmart it's competing not with the brick and mortar companies, they're competing with Amazon and everybody else who's selling you stuff to your doorstep every day in those brown trucks that come knocking at your door. Can you imagine the amount of overhead that you have compared to those companies? And how do you deal with somebody who apparently at the beginning was in a completely different business, again, Amazon selling books, and now they sell everything because they saw that their product was not selling books. The same way you mentioned, Ted, that Kodak was never able to transition from selling film to being an imaging company. Amazon was able to transition from being a bookstore to being a supermarket to who knows what else. Now they have farms, so if any of you have a website, you can go to Amazon and they will run the website for you. So they have transitioned their model at least 4 times, and think how young the company is, how early in time they appeared, and how many times they have changed already their business model.
It's interesting that you make reference to how young, because if you look at the Fortune 500, since I'm on that, look at the company in 1997, you got the Googles, you got the Apples, you got the Amazons, you got the eBays, you got the PayPals, and I can just go on and on and on. And that's all from what? New technologies? And that would be...
Well, to me, it's more interesting than looking at the old companies, because you have to admire and respect a company like J&J that survived for over 100 years. You know, I mean, that's actually a rather astonishing accomplishment, but it's because they are able to adapt and change with the times, change their products. Obviously, they've had to take risks on the innovator's dilemma. They probably had to exercise the Borg strategy a number of times to head off competition, so they're fairly adept. Whether they call it complexity theory or something else, I think that's an example of what they're actually applying.
Fascinating. Just fascinating. And it goes back to that leadership aspect, and there's a name that I'm going to throw out that I'd be surprised, and I'm not intending to insult any of my audience, right? At least I hope not. If you don't, you know me. I apologize up front. Charles Coffin, C-O-F-F-I-N, right? And he was the first CEO of General Electric, 1892 to 1912, right? And he put together what's called systematic management. And as we know, over the years, over the history of General Electric, they created more leaders as a result, and the different styles and the cultures, and like I said, from GE, from light bulbs to jet engines to this, and then, to your point of Kodak, they just had film. They had blinders on and refused to look at any other avenues. And this is what our CEOs and our today cement. One of the messages that they can take away today: open your eyes and explore. You just cannot be in one box, right?
And regarding to what you're mentioning, and it's an excellent example, because one of the things that Kodak didn't do compared to some of the companies you're mentioning or the new high-tech companies is that they were not tolerant for failure. And this is an issue. Companies have to learn how to fail quickly and cheaply, but how to tolerate failure when it appears. That's one way we manage complexity. We've used the example of Apple many times here right now, but Apple has failed many times. There are many failed products. I mean, from Apple TV that seems to go nowhere to the horrible failure of the Newton computer to the Lisa. I mean, they were almost bankrupt at one point and they rebounded. They came back. But one of the things that we always see from Apple is that those failures then trickle to the system and people learn. There is an experience that it's obtained from it. So we can see a clear line from the Newton to the iPad. So a great success of today comes in part from the learning of failure from before. And you try many things and you'll find out many. You just have to know how. And those are complexity-based management skills that are different from your traditional linear perspective, and every product that you manage, every process that you manage has to come to a success. And if not, it's a failure. I would say that complexity management in business environments rewards success, rewards failure, and punishes inaction. So,
I love that, and we're pushing up against the clock. It's again, it's amazing how fast this hour goes. We're going to have to come back and do more of this because I just find it fascinating, and I know our audience are also going to find it very fascinating. And especially if we continue to connect the dots. And as I started off the program, and I said, our CEOs, our CEOs out there are going to say, "Tell me something I don't know that could make me money," right? And we have introduced a lot of concepts to you today. And like I said, in September, on September 25th and 26th, Ted and Rodrigo is going to be part of the faculty. We got other people that we're working on as well. And the intent is to give you a toolbox to walk away with to stay in that prime and to fall into what I'm going to call the Johnson & Johnson and the GE box, where it's consistency and be able to say 45 years of consistent earnings and like that. This is what our opportunity is. Parting words, sir.
Well, just don't be scared by the word complexity. Actually,
Well, it does, doesn't it?
yeah,
Scares
just
the heck out
I
of
mean, I
people.
think you want to take advantage of the techniques that we're going to talk about, because it will end up, if not making you money, allowing you to survive.
Yeah. Parting words from you, sir.
complexity happens, so you better embrace it. So if it's going to happen, because it's happening everywhere, make it work for you instead of fighting against it. Use your resources in a complexity-based mode instead of letting complexity to take you to extinction.
And complexity, if trying to throw some levity on that, it's kind of called marriage too, right?
I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah,
Joe.
yeah,
That's
no
another show.
comment.
That's another show. You two have been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Ted,
you.
welcome back in the
Jim, thank you very much.
Pleasure. My pleasure. We'll be back next Monday. Until then, make it a great week.
Jim White's Circle of Success Show. Please visit our website, jlwcos.tv. Join us next time as Jim White brings it all together on Jim White's Circle of Success.